Howdy all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast. And today's episodes are pretty special because they're coming out the same day that the saints covered in each has been canonized. So, this first one is all about Saint Carlo Acutis, the very first 21st century saint. So right off the bat, we're able to know so much about Carlo because he lived so recently and because so many of his efforts are immortalized on the impacts and the changes that he left behind. And if you get a chance, I really encourage that you check out the website he made called miraculieucharistici.org. It has a list of many miracles around the world and an interactive map that lets you choose places to look at the miracles that are tied to those places. It's actually really cool. And there's also a film being made about Carlo's life. You can find details about it at carlosacutisfilm.com, and I'd be willing to bet that it will be well worth watching once it's finally released. I know I'm going to give it a watch. Carlo was born on May 3rd, 1991 in London, and he was baptized May 18th, 1991 in the Church of Our Lady of the Lord in Chelsea, England. When he was just an infant, his parents moved to Milan, Italy in September of 1991. His parents were very busy with work when he was young, and so he had a nanny, and he would go to daycare with other children and nannies. Once at daycare, other children were bullying Carlo, and one of the nannies encouraged him to tell them to stop. But young Carlo just replied, "Jesus would not be happy if I lost my temper," which is really profound for a child in daycare to be that aware. When Carlo was 6, he began school at the San Carlo Institute in Milan, but it was pretty far from home, so a few months later he actually transferred to the Marcellina Tommaso Institute, and this institute was run by the Sisters of St. Marcellina. On his walks to school, he got to know the people who lived in the homes that he would pass, and he would talk to them anytime he saw them while he was walking past. When he finished middle school, he started attending Jesuit Institute Leon XIII High School. And while in school, his various interests only deepened, including his faith. He taught himself the saxophone, and he was fascinated by computer sciences. Like any kid his age, he loved video games. But he actually limited himself to 1 hour of games per day so that he wouldn't develop any sort of addiction to them, which is surprisingly reasonable for a teenager. I certainly didn't, and to be honest, I still don't limit my video game time. As Carlo grew up, he showed a devotion to God that inspired a lot of the people that were around him. Even his parents, Andrea and Antonia. His mother even said, "Before Carlo's birth, I was really caught up in the culture of our time. I was a prisoner of everything that was relative and limited. Carlo showed me how to live in my century while turning toward eternity." Parents tend to support their kids, but it almost seems like Carlo supported his parents in a way. He helped them leave behind temptations and focus on stuff that really mattered. When Carlo was 7, he received his first communion. And then he was confirmed on May 24th, 2003, when he would have been 12. When he was asked about his faith, he said, "My secret is to contact Jesus every day." And when you think about it, that's really not that hard to do, but so many of us struggle with it because we get so busy in our day-to-day lives, we just kind of forget about that side of it. His parents, though they didn't really hold the same level of devotion that Carlo did, they did come back to their faith because of him. They were married in the church, so it did play a role in their lives, just not a large one. And as they drifted away, Carlo kind of brought them back to it. As I mentioned earlier, Carlo's parents were really successful in their careers, and their jobs just kept them so busy. So they couldn't always be around. That's why they hired an au pair to help them in their home, and the au pair's name was Rajesh Mohor. After becoming friends with Carlo, Rajesh expressed a desire to convert to Christianity and be baptized. Carlo was just a kid, and he already held such strong faith. That's something special. Rajesh said that one of the most impressive and convincing reasons that he decided to convert was because of the generosity that Carlo showed towards those in need. Carlo would routinely bring food to the homeless man in front of his church, and he would pack Tupperwares of food to give out to other homeless people in his town. It's just, he had everything that he could want, but he wanted to share it with the people who didn't have those things. Not long after Rajesh's conversion, Rajesh's friend Stephen Kisnan followed in his footsteps. And then Rajesh's mother visited, and she attended Mass with Carlo and Rajesh. And afterwards, she too asked to be baptized. Carlo was clearly devoted, and this devotion bled over into the others around him. But he still wanted to do more. He raised the question, why do people worry so much about their physical beauty, but don't worry about the beauty of their souls? He wanted to work on the beauty of his soul more than anything else. His first step to beautify his soul, if you will, was to become a catechist at his parish. And the priest there said that Carlo was a young man who was exceptionally transparent. He really wanted to progress in loving his parents, God, his classmates, and those who loved him less. Those who loved him less. He cared about everyone, no matter how little they may have cared about him. Carlo's priest also went on to say that Carlo wanted to apply himself in his studies, to educate himself in his catechism class as well as in school, and particularly computer science in school. Carlo was also remembered as a friend for many of his classmates, and this stemmed from his efforts to stand up for kids being bullied, especially kids with disabilities. He also invited one of his friends to join his family more often when he learned that his friend's parents were getting a divorce. He recognized that this was a really hard time to go through, and while he couldn't really relate, he wanted to try to help his friend be a little bit more comfortable, have a little bit more joy and something to look forward to than just dwell on the divorce of his parents. Some of Carlo's classmates said that they didn't remember him being openly devout. They didn't remember him professing his faith in school constantly. But they do remember him as a very kind person. And this was captured in a March 2025 issue of The Economist. So if you'd like to check it out yourself, go ahead and look it up. His mother did argue otherwise, though, which I thought was kind of odd that his classmates would say he wasn't super openly devout. Like, there's no doubt that he was still devout, but he just didn't force it on others. And I personally do believe the students would have a better idea. Like, obviously, everybody behaves differently in school than they do around their family. Because when you pray, you would pray where you're comfortable. You practice your faith either in a church or where you're comfortable. And school isn't really the setting for that. You're supposed to focus on your studies, on the classes, on everything going on in school. Yes, he could pray, but that wasn't the setting to try to show off his prayer or be open about it. Though I would have to imagine that if some of his classmates asked him about his faith, he would gladly tell them. He wasn't the type of guy to be like, hey, let me tell you about what I believe in because I think you should believe it too. But if somebody went up to him and was like, why are you always so happy, man? He would probably have some really insightful things to say and stuff that would really get your mind thinking. As he went through school, Carlo began a particular fascination with various saints. And this was reflected in his website. He spent a lot of his time researching and praying to them. Through his interest in computer science and his commitment to his faith, his parish priest asked if he would create a website for the parish. Of course, Carlo would help. He basically lived to help others. And a short time after he did that, a priest at his school asked if he would make a website that promoted volunteering. And this website actually won a national competition for volunteer efforts in Italy. Being skilled in Java and C++, Carlo got to making his own website. I did mention it earlier, but I want to elaborate on it a little bit more for you. His website was designed and it was in development to capture and record each Eucharistic miracle in the world, as well as each Marian apparition. Carlo launched this website in 2004, and he worked on it continuously until his passing. The website was featured at an exhibition at Rome's Church of San Carlo Borromeo, and on October 4th, 2006, it was featured at the Feast of St. Francis, just days before Carlo passed away, sadly. I don't think anybody carried on updating the website, though, which is rather unfortunate. Carlo had a talent and a vision. So there's probably not many people who feel like they are qualified to follow in his footsteps. They don't want to fall short of the vision that Carlo had for this website. Well, in high school, Carlo started to get sick, and then his sickness had a rapid onset. On the 1st of October 2006, his throat started hurting. His parents took him to a doctor, and that doctor said that Carlo had peritonitis and that he was dehydrated. And a family friend, who was also a doctor, agreed with the diagnosis. And for those that don't know, because I didn't either, peritonitis is the inflammation of the parotid glands, which are the salivary glands in the sides or back of your face and mouth. But a week went by, and Carlo was getting worse. He was 2 weeks to get out of bed by October 8th. And now his parents weren't so sure about that preliminary diagnosis. They took him to get his blood tested, and the results revealed that he had acute promyelocytic leukemia, which is a severe cancer in the white blood cells. His outlook was very grim. But his parents did all they could to save their child. He was rushed to an ICU and put on a ventilator. The next morning, he was transferred to San Gerardo Hospital, which was one of only 3 hospitals in Italy that had the assets to even attempt to treat Carlo's condition. With the severity of Carlo's sickness, he received the anointing of the sick from the hospital's chaplain. And later, when a nurse came to check on him, he told her not to wake his parents because he knew they were exhausted and he wanted them to be able to get some rest. He then offered his sufferings for the church and the Pope, saying, "I offer to the Lord the sufferings that I will have to undergo for the Pope and for the church." And when he was asked by the doctors if his pain was bad, his reply was simply, "There are people who suffer much more than me." Man, it's just, he was 15 at the time. What 15-year-old has that kind of awareness, that kind of compassion, especially being on death's doorstep? Like 99% of the 15-year-olds that are sick are probably going to be fairly selfish. And if they're this sick, they may not even be selfish as much as just not coherent. They're just going to be out of it. I know I was in the hospital once in a pretty tricky situation, and I really don't remember anything about it. So for him to be this coherent and this compassionate is just, it's something else. Carlo's final words to his mother were, "Mom, don't be afraid. Since Jesus became a man, death has become the passage towards life, and we don't need to flee it. Let us prepare ourselves to experience something extraordinary in the eternal life." Shortly after saying this, he slipped into a coma, and he was transferred into an ICU again. They performed a blood cleansing or transfusion, but after cerebral hemorrhaging, Carlo was pronounced brain dead on October 11th, 2006, and he died the very next day at 6:45 p.m. Carlo's body was brought home, and many people came to pay their respects. And at his funeral, a crowd of strangers came because of all the work that Carlo had done in his very brief life. Carlo said that everyone is born as an original, but many people end up dying as copies. And he most certainly did not die as a photocopy. Carlo wanted to be buried in Assisi in the Church of St. Maria Maggiore, and this church was the leader in the movement to canonize Carlo. With the support of Bishop Raffaello Martinelli and Cardinal Angelo Camastri, Carlo's cause was furthered to reach his beatification in 2018. A collection of Carlo's works and an exhibition of photos of the miracle sites from his website traveled the world. He covered 5 continents, being translated into 18 languages, and reached 10,000 unique places. It was also brought to the canonization of Francisco and Jacinta Marto at Fatima, Portugal, which is really saying something if at somebody's canonization ceremony, they just brought the examples of what Carlo did to get him towards his canonization. By now, we probably know the steps to becoming a saint, and we know Carlo wasn't a martyr, so he would have to have performed some miracles, or there would have had to have been some miracles that could only be explained through his intervention from heaven. If you're like me, you might be thinking something like, but this is so recent. Shouldn't these miracles have been like global news when they occurred? And they actually were fairly famous after they were attributed to Carlo, but it does take time to complete essentially a process of elimination to prove that there is no explanation except for Carlo's help. And so enough time passes from the miracle itself to it being attributed that they kind of drop off the radar and lose coverage. Nonetheless, Carlo has granted 2 proven miracles from heaven. The first happened November 14th, 2019 in Brazil. Mateus Viana had a birth defect, and it was in his pancreas. It made him difficult for him to eat. His mother, Luciana, brought him to a prayer service and prayed a novena to Acutis, asking for help. During the service, Mateus asks to pretty much, I don't want to throw up as much, Carlo. Help me. And on the way home, he told his mother that he was actually feeling better than normal. And when he got home, he asked for solid food. Bear in mind, because of his defect, up until this point, he was on a liquid-only diet. Solid food was out of the question for him. But just suddenly, after praying for Carlo's help, he could eat solid food. And because of this, Pope Francis confirmed the first miracle from Carlo Acutis, and that was enough for him to be beatified. And that ceremony was February 21st, 2020. Before Carlo could be officially canonized, though, he needed another miracle. And this miracle was identified May 23rd, 2024, just over a year ago. But the miracle itself occurred in 2022, when Valeria, a Costa Rican woman, fell off her bike and suffered a brain hemorrhage. This happened July 8th of 2022, and doctors said there was little hope for her survival, and that even if she did survive, she'd probably never be the same. Valeria's mother, Liliana, went to Carlo's tomb and prayed for his intercession. Now, I couldn't see a super obvious reason why she chose Carlo. Maybe he happened to be close by. Maybe they had some other sort of connection to it. I'm not totally sure. I couldn't find a 100% like that's the answer. But whatever the reason was for them choosing Carlo, the same day that Liliana visited his tomb and asked for his intercession, her daughter Valeria started breathing unassisted and started being able to walk again. On July 18th, just 10 days later, doctors performed a CAT scan and all signs of her hemorrhage were totally gone. Pope Francis announced that Carlo would be canonized at the 2025 Jubilee, during the Jubilee of Teenagers from April 25th to the 27th this year. Unfortunately, Pope Francis passed away just days before Carlo was to be canonized. And so that ceremony was put on hold and it was just given an undetermined rain date. But now we don't have to wait any longer for this canonization because a new date was assigned, and that date is today, September 7th, 2025. Since October 10th, 2020, Carlo's relics have been on display at his tomb in the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore. And people regularly visit and complete pilgrimages to Carlo's tomb, praying for his help. Because of Carlo's fondness towards video games, he was actually gained the title of the first gamer saint. And I think that's kind of funny to think about. Like, who would have ever thought there'd be such a thing as a gamer saint? But here we are. It just goes to show you, anything can happen and life never ceases to surprise you. But man, Carlo only lived 15 years and he left behind an incredible impact. He changed people's lives, and I can't even imagine how many people would have been touched if he was still alive today. But what are your thoughts on Carlo? I hope you enjoyed his story because it's really interesting, and there's honestly a lot more to it. I don't want to make like a 2-hour-long episode going into every detail, but I tried to cover as much as I could while still keeping it fairly brief. But even in this brief summary, you can really catch a glimpse of just how dedicated this young man was. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on St. Carlo. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share it with your friends, or send me a suggestion on a saint that I can check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search for the Sanctified Podcast, and I should have a few episodes uploaded on whatever service you're using. Take care, and I hope you have a wonderful day.